The struggle between Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens wasn't just about survival, it was about dominance. Evidence is now emerging that suggests violent clashes, with both species competing for territory and resources. Recent discoveries have revealed a darker side to their interactions, one that involves brutal confrontations that shaped the future of human evolution. Neanderthals, often depicted as brutish and primitive, were much more complex than previously thought. They were strong, muscular beings who lived in harsh environments and had to fight for every scrap of survival. Physically, Neanderthals were built for power, with thick bones and a large barrel-chested frame. Their large brains were capable of sophisticated thought, but their survival was often determined by their ability to adapt to a constantly changing world. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals were skilled hunters and toolmakers. They crafted sharp, precise stone tools and used them for everything from hunting large game to crafting shelters. Their social structures, though less understood, are now believed to have been complex. Neanderthals worked together in small groups, relying on each other for survival. They were capable of a wide range of behaviors, including caring for the sick and elderly, as well as burying their dead, a sign of cultural complexity. Despite their strength and intelligence, Neanderthals faced a constant battle against the elements, large predators, and the competition of early Homo sapiens. While Neanderthals were physically imposing, Homo sapiens had a cognitive advantage. With larger, more advanced brains, early humans were capable of more sophisticated planning, communication, and social organization. This intellectual edge gave Homo sapiens the ability to create better tools, form larger social groups, and develop strategies that helped them outcompete the Neanderthals. The key to Homo sapiens' success, however, wasn't just their intelligence, it was their ability to adapt to ever-changing conditions, including conflicts with Neanderthals. The coexistence of these two species lasted for thousands of years, with evidence now suggesting that their interactions were far from peaceful. While it was once thought that the Neanderthals disappeared gradually due to climate change and interbreeding with Homo sapiens, newer research paints a much more violent picture. Fossil evidence indicates that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens fought each other in brutal, life-or-death struggles for survival and control of territory. Homo sapiens, our direct ancestors, were not the only species vying for dominance in the prehistoric world. As we move from Neanderthals, we need to understand what made Homo sapiens different and how these differences influenced their eventual rise to supremacy. Homo sapiens emerged around 300,000 years ago in Africa, but it wasn't until much later that they spread across the globe, reaching Europe and Asia, where they would encounter Neanderthals. The early Homo sapiens were more than just a physically distinct species. They were a force driven by superior cognitive abilities that gave them a competitive edge. Unlike the Neanderthals, who lived relatively isolated in small group lifestyles, early Homo sapiens thrived by forming larger, more organized groups, which allowed them to share resources, ideas, and strategies more effectively. The most significant difference between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals was their brain. Homo sapiens had a larger, more advanced brain, especially in the frontal lobes, which are responsible for higher cognitive functions, such as problem-solving, complex thinking, and social interaction. This enhanced brainpower gave Homo sapiens a greater ability to innovate, plan, and adapt. They could devise sophisticated tools, develop new hunting strategies, and even create art and symbolic representations, marking a leap in intellectual and cultural evolution. Early Homo sapiens were also capable of long-distance communication, thanks to the development of more complex language skills. This ability to communicate effectively within large groups, coupled with their innovative tool-making skills, set them apart from Neanderthals, who, while skilled, did not exhibit the same level of abstract thinking. Homo sapiens used their communication abilities to create more organized and cooperative groups, which may have allowed them to overcome environmental challenges, outcompete predators, and ultimately fight for control over territories and resources. As Homo sapiens began migrating out of Africa around 100,000 years ago, they moved into regions that were already inhabited by Neanderthals. While there's evidence of some peaceful coexistence between the two species, there's also growing proof that these early humans did not hesitate to clash with Neanderthals over hunting grounds, shelter, and territory. Early Homo sapiens were more aggressive in their expansion, and their greater adaptability allowed them to thrive in a variety of environments. They were more resourceful, had better weapons, and utilized more advanced tools, which helped them survive in the harsh conditions of Ice Age Europe. What made the Homo sapiens particularly dangerous to the Neanderthals wasn't just their intellectual advantages. It was their social organization and ability to work together as a cohesive unit. Their larger social groups allowed them to hunt in more effective ways, often targeting larger prey and employing strategies that Neanderthals could not match. This strategic advantage put pressure on Neanderthal populations, who were forced to compete with a superior species not only for food, but for shelter and territory as well. One of the most significant advantages Homo sapiens had over the Neanderthals was their ability to adapt quickly to new environments. Neanderthals, while resilient and strong, were more specialized in their approach to survival, whereas Homo sapiens could develop new strategies based on their surroundings. Whether it was utilizing fire, hunting in organized groups, or creating new tools, early Homo sapiens demonstrated a level of flexibility that allowed them to thrive in a wide range of environments. This adaptability may have been key in their ability to dominate regions where Neanderthals had once flourished. This ongoing competition for resources and land likely led to violent encounters, with Homo sapiens using their intellectual and social advantages to drive the Neanderthals into more hostile territories. These clashes weren't just territorial, they were battles for survival. And as Homo sapiens expanded further into Europe, the pressure mounted on the Neanderthals, eventually pushing them into extinction. The question remains, how do we know that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens didn't just coexist peacefully? What evidence suggests that their interactions were far more violent than we once thought? Recent archaeological discoveries are shedding light on the brutal reality of these ancient confrontations. Fossils, tools, and even skeletal remains from both species reveal a story of territorial aggression and outright violence. For example, researchers have uncovered skulls of Neanderthals that show signs of blunt force trauma, indicating violent injuries possibly inflicted by a sharp weapon or even a direct hit from a rock or other tool. These injuries are not the result of accidents. They appear to have been inflicted during conflict, perhaps during a battle for territory or dominance. One of the most significant pieces of evidence comes from the La Chapelle-aux-Saints site in France, where the nearly complete skeleton of a Neanderthal was found with a large healing injury to the skull. The injury was likely caused by a blow, possibly from a blunt weapon. Archaeologists have suggested that such injuries could have been the result of encounters with early Homo sapiens. The fact that Neanderthal populations seem to have experienced a higher number of these traumatic injuries than expected indicates that violent interactions with Homo sapiens may have been more common than once believed. In addition to these traumatic injuries, evidence of weapons used during this period further strengthens the theory of violent conflict. Archaeologists have found that Neanderthals, like Homo sapiens, used tools and weapons to hunt and protect themselves. These weapons were made from flint and stone, carefully shaped into sharp-edged tools. However, the emergence of more advanced weapons among Homo sapiens, such as spears, bows, and arrowheads, gave them a distinct advantage in any conflict. One particularly telling piece of evidence is the discovery of spear points embedded in the remains of Neanderthals. These spear points, which were more refined and accurate than those of Neanderthals, suggest that Homo sapiens were actively hunting and potentially attacking Neanderthals. The evidence of violence extends beyond physical injuries. A study of the Krapina site in Croatia, which is one of the largest Neanderthal burial sites, shows signs of ritualistic violence. Some of the remains exhibit signs of post-mortem dismemberment, which could have been a way of showing dominance over a fallen enemy. This suggests that violent clashes between the two species may not have been random, but could have been ritualistic acts, part of a broader struggle for control over territory and resources. In modern times, rituals of war and victory have often involved the mutilation of enemies, and it's possible that this practice had similar roots in early human conflict. Moreover, evidence from recent studies, including the use of advanced imaging technology, has uncovered new insights into the wounds of ancient human remains. One striking discovery is that the bones of early Homo sapiens sometimes show signs of healing from injuries similar to those inflicted on Neanderthals. This points to the possibility that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just clash once. They may have engaged in multiple violent confrontations over long periods. The struggle for survival wasn't just about resources, it was about dominance, and both species were capable of inflicting and sustaining injury in these life-or-death encounters. One historical reference that speaks to the brutality of this ancient conflict comes from the Neanderthal burial sites found in Spain. Archaeologists have uncovered remains showing evidence of what appears to be a last stand, Neanderthals surrounded and forced into defensive positions. The fact that some of the skeletons were found in such a manner suggests they were overwhelmed in battle, perhaps by a superior force of Homo sapiens. This aligns with modern warfare tactics where weaker groups are systematically pushed into corners or forced to fight for their lives. As Homo sapiens began to expand their territories, Neanderthals were pushed further into the harshest environments. Yet, even in their retreat, evidence suggests that these two species continued to engage in violent confrontations. Sites in the Levant and Europe show that, as Homo sapiens moved westward and northward, Neanderthal populations dwindled, possibly due to both environmental factors and violent clashes with early humans. It is likely that many of these encounters were initiated by Homo sapiens as they sought to take over territory previously occupied by Neanderthals. The final blow to the Neanderthals may not have come from one decisive battle, but from a relentless campaign of conflict and competition. The combination of resource depletion, violent clashes, and the superior social structures of Homo sapiens led to the eventual extinction of the Neanderthal population. As we dive deeper into the conflict between Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, we must ask, what were the driving forces behind these brutal confrontations? Was it purely a struggle for resources, or were there other, more complex motivations at play? Archaeologists and anthropologists have offered several theories to explain why these two species clashed so violently, and what the long-term consequences of these conflicts were. The Ice Age, with its harsh climates and limited resources, would have made survival a constant challenge. As populations of Homo sapiens grew and expanded across Europe, they began to encroach on Neanderthal territories, competing for food and shelter. The survival of one species could easily depend on displacing the other. For Homo sapiens, this competition wasn't just about basic survival, it was also about their evolutionary advantage. As we saw in Part 2, Homo sapiens had superior social structures, more advanced weapons, and the ability to adapt to a wider range of environments. Neanderthals, despite their strength and resilience, were more specialized and less adaptable, which likely made them more vulnerable to the encroachment of Homo sapiens. It's not hard to imagine that territorial disputes between the two species could have escalated into violent confrontations. In modern times, when resources are limited, groups often fight for control over the best hunting grounds or shelter. The same would have been true for our ancient ancestors. If Homo sapiens were able to outcompete the Neanderthals for these resources, it would have forced the Neanderthals into more marginal areas, creating greater tensions. But competition for resources wasn't the only driving factor. Another theory suggests that cultural and territorial aggression played a significant role in the violent interactions between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Early Homo sapiens were not just more intellectually advanced, they were also more socially organized. Their ability to form large, cohesive groups likely gave them a significant advantage in combat, as they could coordinate more effectively in a fight for survival. Neanderthals, on the other hand, lived in smaller groups, which meant they had less manpower and fewer social strategies to cope with external threats. The larger groups of Homo sapiens would have had the advantage when it came to hunting, building shelters, and, of course, defending territory. If these two species came into conflict over territory, it's likely that the more socially organized Homo sapiens would have emerged victorious in many instances. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of territorial defense in early Homo sapiens, including the use of weapons and the construction of more permanent shelters, which would have been more defensible. On the other hand, Neanderthals, who lived more nomadically, may not have had the same means of defending their territory. This imbalance in territorial defense could have sparked many of the violent encounters between the two species. Neanderthal decline and Homo sapiens advantage. While resource competition and territorial aggression explain some of the conflict, they don't account for why Neanderthals eventually went extinct while Homo sapiens survived and thrived. What was the tipping point? Some scientists believe that the advantage of Homo sapiens was not just in physical strength or intelligence, but in their ability to innovate and adapt. Homo sapiens were highly adaptable, able to modify their tools and strategies based on the environment they were in. This allowed them to exploit new resources that Neanderthals couldn't access, further increasing the pressure on Neanderthal populations. Evidence of this adaptability is seen in the sophisticated weapons Homo sapiens developed. The use of spears, bows, and arrows gave them a tactical advantage in hunting and combat. Neanderthals, while they had stone tools and could certainly be formidable in battle, lacked the same level of technological innovation. Furthermore, Homo sapiens' ability to communicate through complex language would have been a crucial advantage in organizing group efforts, whether for hunting or defense. Neanderthals, on the other hand, may have had a more limited form of communication, which could have hindered their ability to coordinate large-scale efforts. One particularly striking example of this advantage is seen in the archaeological record of Homo sapiens, which shows a clear progression in tool development and social organization over time. In contrast, Neanderthal tools and cultural practices remained relatively unchanged. This lack of innovation could have been a major factor in their eventual extinction. Homo sapiens, with their superior social structures, advanced tools, and ability to adapt to different environments, were simply better equipped to survive the challenges of the Ice Age. Direct combat. Evidence of hand-to-hand battles. Another theory that has gained traction in recent years is the idea that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens didn't just engage in sporadic clashes over resources. Some researchers believe that these two species may have had direct, hand-to-hand combat. Fossil evidence, including skulls and other bones, shows signs of blunt force trauma and other injuries that suggest close-quarter violence. Some of these injuries are so severe that they could only have been inflicted in a violent confrontation, perhaps during a face-to-face battle. One notable discovery was made at the El Cedron cave in Spain, where Neanderthal remains were found with injuries that suggest they were struck by blunt objects. These injuries were likely caused by weapons like clubs or even rocks. While it's possible these injuries occurred in the context of hunting accidents, the concentration of injuries found on certain individuals suggests that they were more likely the result of violent conflict with Homo sapiens. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Neanderthal extinction is the discovery that Homo sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just fight each other, they also interbred. Genetic studies have shown that modern humans carry traces of Neanderthal DNA, particularly in populations outside of Africa. This raises the question, did Homo sapiens completely wipe out the Neanderthals, or were they absorbed into the gene pool through interbreeding? Some researchers argue that, rather than a violent extinction, the Neanderthals were assimilated into the growing Homo sapiens populations. As Homo sapiens expanded across Europe and Asia, they likely encountered Neanderthals and engaged in both conflict and interbreeding. Over time, Neanderthals may have been gradually absorbed into the larger Homo sapiens population, leaving behind only traces of their DNA. Others believe that Homo sapiens deliberately exterminated the Neanderthals, possibly through genocide. The evidence of violent clashes, combined with the gradual disappearance of Neanderthal populations, might suggest that Homo sapiens were actively pushing Neanderthals into extinction, either through direct conflict or by outcompeting them for territory. While the exact nature of their demise remains unclear, it's likely that the Neanderthals' extinction was a complex process involving both competition, conflict, and assimilation. Neanderthal DNA and its legacy. Despite the extinction of the Neanderthals, their legacy lives on in modern humans. Thanks to advances in genetic testing, we now know that every non-African human carries traces of Neanderthal DNA. In fact, up to 2% of the DNA of modern humans from outside Africa is derived from Neanderthals. This genetic legacy has been linked to various traits in modern humans, including immune system responses, skin color, and even certain diseases. Interestingly, some studies have shown that Neanderthal genes may have provided benefits to Homo sapiens, particularly in terms of adapting to harsh environments. For example, Neanderthal genes have been linked to the immune system's ability to fight off infections, a trait that may have been crucial for early Homo sapiens as they expanded into new territories and encountered unfamiliar diseases. Some scientists believe that this genetic inheritance helped Homo sapiens survive in regions where Neanderthals once thrived. The presence of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans is a reminder that, despite the violent history between the two species, there was also a blending of cultures and genes. This genetic legacy is a testament to the complex relationship between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, a relationship that involved both conflict and cooperation.